My name is Evelyn Marlowe. I'm 62. A mother, a grandmother, a woman of deep roots and darker skin. The kind that some people see and decide things about before you even open your mouth. I wasn't born into ease. I carved out a life through long hours, quiet patience, and the kind of resilience you don't teach. You inherit. I built a family. I worked as a school librarian for 35 years. I paid every bill, buried every wound, and smiled even when it hurt. And when love finally came knocking again after widowhood, I thought maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten me. His name was Mark Dawson. He was charming, gentle, the kind of quiet white man who wore grief like a soft coat. We met at a library fundraiser. He said he admired the way I carried myself. Said I reminded him of someone strong, his mother, I think. We fell into rhythm quickly. By the second year, we'd moved in together. By the 5th, we'd joined our finances. And by the 10th, I thought we'd built something real. But then I found out what he was really using my money for. Not medicine, not retirement, not the home we were building together. No, he was using it to fund a lie, to support someone else, someone he never told me about. And when I tried to speak up, my own children looked at me like I was the one who'd broken trust. This is not a story about heartbreak. It's a story about being used, being dismissed, being seen as strong enough to carry everything, but never fragile enough to protect. But it's also a story of what happens when a woman like me decides enough. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the slow unraveling of what I thought was love, and the quiet revenge that tasted sweeter than anything I've ever known. I never planned to fall in love again. After my husband, Leonard, passed from pancreatic cancer, I'd made peace with solitude. I had my books, my little garden, Sunday calls from my daughter Claire, and the occasional visit from Jacob and his wife. My house in Charleston creaked at night, but it was mine. Quiet was my new companion. That changed the day I met Mark Dawson. It was a warm spring evening, and I had agreed, reluctantly, to attend a library fundraiser at the high school where I'd once worked. I wore a navy blue dress, ironed with care, and pinned on my late mother's brooch. I was used to fading into the background, but that night, someone saw me. He walked up with a glass of cheap white wine in one hand and a quiet smile. "You're Evelyn, right? Evelyn Marlowe? The librarian with the best reading voice in the county?" I laughed. "That's a very specific compliment." He nodded. "I remember it. You read to my niece's class years ago. She said you made Charlotte's Web sound like Shakespeare." There was something disarming about him. He didn't look at me the way men often do at my age, either with pity or invisible eyes. He looked at me like I was fully there. We spent the rest of the evening in a corner, talking about books and grief and all the things we thought we'd never say out loud again. He told me he'd lost his wife 6 years ago. Said her name was Margaret, and that he still hadn't moved her teacup from the shelf. There was no grand spark, just a quiet recognition. Two people, weathered and alone, holding their pain with both hands. That night, we didn't exchange numbers. He simply said, "I hope we run into each other again." We did. He started showing up to the weekly book club I co-facilitated at the church. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I noticed he never had the book of the week, but always remembered what I'd said about it. He was consistent, kind, thoughtful. When he found out I had arthritis in my knees, he started parking closer so I wouldn't have to walk far. He learned I loved jasmine tea and always had a fresh tin ready. When I mentioned my roof leaked during summer storms, he showed up the next day with tools in hand. I hadn't felt that kind of care in years, not since Leonard, and even then, Leonard had been stern, dutiful. Mark made me laugh. After 6 months of long phone calls, quiet dinners, and Sunday walks by the river, he asked me in that low, almost shy voice of his, "Would it be all right if I took you out to someplace a little nicer? Maybe even held your hand when we get there?" I remember blushing. At 62. I said yes. Looking back, I try to remember if there were signs, if there were cracks in the glass that I chose not to see. But in the beginning, there weren't. There was just kindness, steady, calm, comforting. He didn't just enter my life. He nested in it, slowly and gently, like a song I'd forgotten I loved. And I let him in. I wanted to believe in love again. I wanted to believe someone could see the tiredness in my bones and still call me beautiful. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to finish the rest of this life alone. And Mark? He made it so easy to believe. We moved in together 2 years after we met. It wasn't a grand decision. No big proposal, no moving truck with a red bow. Just a Sunday afternoon conversation over coffee. Mark looked at me and said, "Evie, I like waking up near you. I like your porch swing and your sleepy voice in the morning. Let's stop playing house across 2 addresses." I smiled and told him to bring his things, slowly. I didn't want to feel like I was losing my space. He understood. He always seemed to understand. At first, it felt like new life was blooming again, quietly. We made dinner together most nights. He'd chop vegetables while I stirred sauces. He kissed the back of my neck when I leaned over the stove. When I got tired, he rubbed my feet without being asked. And for a woman like me, a woman who had spent her whole life working, caregiving, stretching herself thin for others, that kind of gentle attention felt like sunlight after a storm. My daughter Claire was cautiously optimistic. She liked that he was calm and had a decent job in retirement, consulting something or other I never quite followed. She came over with her little boy, Aidan, who immediately took to Mr. Mark. That part stung a little. My late husband had never gotten to meet his grandson. Jacob, my son, was more distant. His wife, Rachel, barely spoke when they visited. I'd always felt her judgment. She said little things that weren't cruel on the surface, but always carried a sting. "Oh, you've redecorated again, Evelyn?" Mark's influence, I suppose. Or, "Is it safe to put joint finances together at your age?" I brushed it off. I told myself not everyone is comfortable with seeing their mother-in-law start over. Maybe she saw it as a betrayal of Leonard's memory. Or maybe she just didn't like seeing a woman like me, dark-skinned and still standing tall, find love again. Still, I thought everything was on the right track. Mark made friends easily. He had that soft, white Southern politeness that charmed everyone at first pass. He'd chat with my neighbors about lawn care, sit through my book club meetings with thoughtful nods, and always made a point to help clear dishes. And then came Nancy. She arrived in our lives like a breeze you don't notice until the room gets cold. She was introduced as a long-time family friend of Mark's. She worked in real estate and hosted wine nights where everyone had to remove their shoes and pretend they liked brie. At first, I tried to like her. She brought me plants. She complimented my jewelry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something in her smile was condescending, like she was keeping a joke just for herself. Mark assured me she was harmless. "Nancy's just loud," he'd say, brushing my concern aside. "She was close with Margaret, my late wife. We've all known each other for decades." She started calling the house more, stopping by unannounced, leaving wine on our doorstep with little notes like, "For a cozy night with your man, enjoy." Once I found her sitting on our porch when I got home from the pharmacy. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, her voice syrupy. "I thought you were out for the day. Mark said I could wait here." Wait here, like it was her home, like he had invited her in before I could. I didn't say anything that time, just smiled. Offered her tea, sat across from her and wondered why my stomach was twisting so tight. Mark brushed it off again. "You're reading too much into things, love. Nancy's harmless." I wanted to believe him. I didn't want to be the bitter woman always questioning everything. I told myself I was just adjusting, just being protective, just healing old wounds that had nothing to do with Nancy at all. But something in me knew. Something in me always knew. It was subtle at first. Small things that most people would dismiss. The way Mark started locking his phone at night. The late evening walks that got just a little too long. The way he'd come back in with that dazed, detached look, like his mind hadn't quite returned with his body. One night I asked him, lightly, gently, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just tired. These joints aren't what they used to be, you know." He kissed my forehead and went to bed early. I stood in the kitchen that night, washing a cup that didn't need washing, listening to the silence in the house. I used to love our silence. It felt warm, comfortable, earned. But lately, it had taken on a new weight, heavy, guarded, uneasy. Nancy started showing up more, and always at the oddest times. Once on a Tuesday morning, another time just as we were about to leave for church. She always had a reason, dropping something off, needing Mark's help with her Wi-Fi, whatever that meant. She never called me Evie, just Evelyn. Always said it like it tasted sour. I caught her once touching Mark's wrist when she laughed, her fingers lingering too long. It wasn't a flirt. It was a message, a claim. But Mark never flinched, never looked guilty. And that confused me more than anything. I started to feel like the outsider in my own home. And then came the strange withdrawals. I wasn't snooping, not really. I handled most of our household budgeting and I kept things simple. Utilities, groceries, prescriptions, a little cushion in savings. But one afternoon, when I logged into our account to schedule a payment for my mother's medication, I noticed it, a $3,500 withdrawal. Mark's name on it, labeled Transfer, Mateo Fund. I didn't know what that was. We had no foundation, no family member named Mateo. I thought maybe it was a mistake. So I looked further. There were more, one a month, always the same range, $2,000 to $4,000. All marked as Mateo Fund. I waited until Mark got home. I asked him directly, "Who is Mateo?" He paused, just for a second. But in that second, I saw the truth land in his eyes. "He's my son," he said slowly. "From a relationship before Margaret. He's in Italy, Rome. I never told you because, well, we're not close. His mother doesn't want contact." I was stunned. "You never told me you had a son." He rubbed his forehead, tired. "It's complicated. I send money to help him. He's sick. Some kind of rare cancer. I didn't want to burden you." I didn't know what to say. It felt like the floor beneath me had shifted again. Part of me wanted to believe him. Illness. Guilt. A father trying to do right in secret. It almost made sense. But another part, the older, quieter, more experienced part, whispered something else. Why hide a sick child? Why lie about money that came from our joint account? Why now? That night I sat alone in the living room long after Mark had gone to bed. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the soft hum of the fridge and the even softer sound of something breaking inside me. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew I had just stepped onto uneven ground, and I wasn't sure either of us would survive the fall. After that night, something in me wouldn't rest. I wanted to trust him. God knows I did. I wanted to believe that what we had was still real, flawed maybe, but not dishonest. But the seed of doubt had been planted and it was growing fast. I searched for Mateo Dawson online. Tried different spellings, different combinations, Rome, Italy, cancer, fundraisers, nothing. No obituaries, no social media, no GoFundMe, no patient stories, just silence. That's when I did something I never imagined myself doing. I checked his phone while he was showering. I didn't want to be that woman, but I was. His passcode was still the same, our anniversary. I opened his messages. There weren't many. He had always been careful, maybe too careful, but there was one thread with a contact saved as M. It wasn't a son, it was Nancy. Their messages weren't sexual, they were worse, intimate, familiar, coded. Transfer's done. Same time next month? Can't wait to see you again. Your other life misses you. Evie still asking questions? Don't worry, she believes it. Mateo's the perfect cover. I sat on the edge of our bed, phone shaking in my hand, stomach hollow. Perfect cover. So there was no Mateo, no dying son in Rome, just a made-up name to siphon money from me to her. All this time, I thought I was sharing a home, a life, a future, but I was just funding theirs. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I felt numb. Mark came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, humming. I looked at him and realized I didn't know the man standing in front of me. Not really. I'd loved a mask, a story. And I'd opened my life, my home, my heart to someone who was taking pieces of me and feeding them to another woman. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't know what I would say that wouldn't end in screams. Instead, I waited. The next morning, I called Claire. "Sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "do you remember when Mark told us about his son, Mateo?" "Of course," she said. "That story broke my heart. Did it ever seem odd to you that he never mentioned him before?" There was a pause. Then her tone shifted. "Mom, what's going on?" I told her everything I'd found. The transactions, the fake identity, the messages. She didn't believe me. Not really. "Are you sure you're not misreading? Maybe it's not what it seems." It was the same with Jacob. Even worse, Rachel spoke up on the phone. "You always think someone's out to get you, Evelyn. Maybe you're just paranoid." That hurt. I wasn't just losing a partner. I was losing the trust of my own children. Mark had built a version of me in their minds. Dramatic, overcautious, emotional. And I had no proof. Just screenshots that could be misinterpreted. A hunch that felt like a storm inside my chest. He had them. Somehow, he had them. I realized then that this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, isolation. He wanted me to feel crazy, alone, unsure of my own instincts. And for a moment it worked, but only for a moment. Because something in me, something older than fear, woke up. I wasn't about to let them write my ending. I didn't say a word to Mark for 3 days. Not out of fear, not out of shock, but strategy. I needed time to think, to breathe, to move in silence the way women like me have always had to. If I exploded too soon, he'd retreat, hide things, spin more lies. I couldn't afford to fall into that trap. So I cooked his meals, kissed his cheek, folded his socks. He thought I'd let it go. That was his mistake. The next step was simple. Find out where the money was really going. I opened a new checking account in my name only and slowly began shifting what little was left in our joint account. I stopped letting him handle any bills. I smiled through it all. And then I made a call to a woman named Tasha I used to work with. She had gone from being a part-time library assistant to working for a local private investigator downtown. She'd always said if I ever needed anything real, to call her. I told her I needed the truth about someone close to me. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "Give me 3 days." While she worked, I kept pretending. Mark asked if I wanted to take a short trip, just the two of us, maybe to Asheville or Savannah. Said I'd been tense lately. I smiled. "That sounds nice." He told me Nancy would be stopping by later in the week to drop off some documents for her foundation. I said, "Tell her I'll make peach cobbler." He looked confused, suspicious even. I let him. On the 3rd day, Tasha called me. "Evie," she said, "there is no Mateo Dawson, not in Rome, not in Italy, not anywhere." She'd run the names through international databases, hospital registries, public records. Nothing. The bank account the funds were being wired to? It wasn't overseas. It was in Charleston, under the name of one Nancy Hollins. Mark hadn't just lied. He hadn't just stolen. He'd created a ghost son as a front, a perfect fiction that made him look noble, charitable. That made me look suspicious for even questioning it. And Nancy had been cashing the money I worked for. She smiled in my kitchen, hugged me on my birthday, and all the while she was stealing from me with manicured fingers and expensive perfume. That night, I stood in the bathroom staring at my own reflection. My skin, dark, tired, but strong, looked unfamiliar. My eyes weren't crying. They were calculating. I realized then that I had a choice. I could confront them in rage, throw things, demand answers, or I could do what they'd never expect. I could be quiet, still, prepared. I'd spent decades surviving this world as a black woman, navigating judgment, invisibility, and silence. I knew how to move without being seen, how to plan without noise. And this time, I wasn't just surviving. I was coming for my peace, and I was going to make sure they both felt the cold of what they tried to take from me. I waited until Sunday. Nancy had invited us to a garden brunch at her place, something she did every few months to remind the rest of Charleston's social crowd that she still ran the room. She always played the gracious hostess. Lace gloves, cucumber sandwiches, flutes of mimosa lined like soldiers. I wore white that day, not for style, for clarity. I had printed the bank statements Tasha sent me. I made a neat little folder labeled "For Nancy." No drama, no yelling, just paper. The kind of truth no one can shout over. We arrived at 11 a.m. sharp. Nancy met us at the gate like we were royalty. She kissed Mark on the cheek, too close to the mouth, then turned to me, all fake warmth. "Evelyn, darling, you look radiant. That dress is so brave." I smiled. "Thank you, Nancy. I thought today called for something bold." Mark didn't seem to notice anything off. He was already halfway into a conversation about wine pairings with some man from Savannah. I waited until the guests had champagne in hand. Waited until Nancy was bragging about a recent donation to a historical society she hadn't actually made. Then I stood up from the table, quietly. No announcement, just stood. I walked to her, handed her the folder. She blinked, confused. "What's this?" "Your monthly donations," I said. She laughed nervously. "What?" "Don't worry. I left out the part where you pretended to be a dying child in Rome. Wouldn't want to confuse the guests." The garden went still. She opened the folder, her fingers trembling. She scanned the first few pages, and that's when her smile cracked. Just for a second. That was all I needed. Mark stood slowly, like he wasn't sure which version of himself to wear. "Evie, let's talk." "No," I said. "No more talking." I turned to the guests. "You all know Nancy. You know Mark. But what you might not know is that they've been siphoning thousands of dollars from me under a fake name, Mateo, a son who doesn't exist. They created a lie, built a whole life on it, and made me the fool financing it." Nancy muttered, "You don't understand." "I understand enough," I said, my voice low, calm. "I understand theft. I understand betrayal. And I understand how easy it was for the two of you to assume I'd never figure it out." Mark finally spoke. "Evie, please. This is not the place." I looked him straight in the eye. "You took my love, my trust, my savings, and then you tried to twist my own children against me." The silence after that was heavier than any scream. I didn't need to throw anything. I didn't need to cry. I just walked away, left them there, surrounded by champagne glasses and gasps and the cold realization that I'd flipped their perfect little plan inside out. Later that evening, I got a call from Claire. Her voice was tight. "Mom, I heard." I didn't say anything. She added, "I saw the documents. You sent them to me. I didn't want to believe it." "That makes two of us," I said. "I'm sorry." That was the first time she'd said it in years, and she meant it. Jacob sent me a text a few hours later. "We were wrong. I'm ashamed. I love you." Nancy deleted her social media that night. Mark moved out the next morning. He didn't even knock on my bedroom door, and just like that, everything familiar, everything I thought was mine, was gone. But in that empty space, something unexpected grew. Freedom. The house felt different without him, quieter, lighter, but also lonelier than I expected. There were moments when I caught myself setting out 2 cups of tea, then remembering. I'd pass by the closet and pause at the space where his jackets used to hang. Some nights, I'd wake up expecting to hear his breathing next to mine, only to find a silence so still it almost hummed. It was grief. Not for him, but for the version of myself I had been with him. The softness, the shared routines, the belief that love in my later years could still be simple and safe. But I also started to notice something else. I was sleeping better. My chest didn't feel tight in the mornings. I played my music louder, danced a little while making eggs. I repainted the guest room in a bold ochre, something he once called too loud. I liked how it glowed, and I finally called my lawyer. We had never married, but there were still shared accounts, automatic payments, household expenses that needed separating. It took a few weeks, but eventually I untangled every financial knot he'd tied around me. I closed the joint account and left exactly 0.32 in it. Let him explain that to Nancy. Claire started calling more. At first I didn't answer. I needed space. I wasn't ready to make it easy. But on the 4th voicemail, she broke down crying. "Mom, I didn't protect you. I didn't even listen to you. You deserved better from me. Please let me fix this." So I called her back. She and Aiden came over that weekend. He ran into my arms like nothing had happened. He asked about Mr. Mark, and I just told him, sometimes grown-ups have to say goodbye to people who lie. Claire sat on the couch and didn't speak for a long time. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You were always the strong one, and I think I used that as an excuse not to check if you were okay." We cried together. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears, real ones, healing ones. Jacob came around eventually too. He didn't say much at first, just fixed a leak under the sink and stayed for dinner. That was enough for me, but I didn't let them back in all at once. Because love, real love, requires presence, humility, time. And this time, I wasn't going to give mine away so easily. I started volunteering at the library again, not full-time, just the story hour with the little ones. Their voices filled the space inside me that had gone hollow. One girl, a shy 6-year-old with tight braids and wide eyes, came up to me after a reading and whispered, "You sound like a queen." That stayed with me for days. I bought a new armchair. The old one Mark loved was donated to the shelter downtown. I started writing in a notebook every morning, things I saw, dreams I remembered, the names of flowers blooming in my backyard. Some mornings, I'd catch a flicker of bitterness trying to settle in my heart, but I never let it take root. I'd brewed something far stronger, a quiet kind of power, not loud, not vengeful, just rooted, steady, untouchable. Because now I knew the truth. They never broke me. They just revealed who they really were and reminded me of who I've always been. It was exactly 4 months after the garden brunch when Mark called. I saw his name flash on my phone screen, just Mark Dawson, plain and heavy, and I let it ring. No voicemail, no second attempt, just one call, like a test. I didn't pick up. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea instead and sat by the window, letting the quiet wrap around me. The next day, he called again. This time he left a message. "Evie, please, just give me 5 minutes. I know I can't undo anything, but I need you to hear me." I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted it. There was nothing left for me in his voice. Later that week, I heard from someone at the senior center that Nancy had left Charleston, quietly. Some said she moved to Arizona. Others claimed she was seen trying to sell a condo in Atlanta. No one knew for sure. It didn't matter. People like her always find somewhere else to start over until they rot from the inside. I, on the other hand, was finally beginning. I changed the locks on my doors, not because I feared him, but because I wanted every part of that life gone. I even got a new mailbox, one of those big brass ones that clang with authority when it shuts. Symbolic? Maybe. But I wanted my house to reflect the woman I'd become. One afternoon, while planting marigolds along the fence, I saw something odd in the mail. An envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from Mark. He wrote 3 pages, front and back. Apologies, regrets, memories of the life we shared, our first picnic, the time he surprised me with jasmine tea after I told him once, in passing, that I missed my mother's garden. "I didn't know how to stop," he wrote. "Nancy made me feel needed, powerful. But you made me feel safe. I didn't know how to be a man inside that." He ended with a line I'll never forget. "I hope, in some small corner of your heart, you remember me as more than what I became." I folded the letter, tied it with string, and burned it in the fireplace that evening, not out of hatred, but because I refused to carry a man's guilt like it's mine to hold. I never wrote back, never called, never gave him the ending he wanted, because that's the real revenge, isn't it? Silence. No explanation, no reaction, just peace. That kind of peace can't be faked. It's earned. And I had earned every inch of it. Life moved on, not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily, like rain smoothing out broken pavement. I started hosting Sunday dinners again. Just me, Claire, Jacob, Aiden, and my piece. We kept it simple. Roast chicken, sweet potatoes, laughter that didn't feel forced anymore. I didn't demand apologies from them. I let their presence be the apology. One evening, Claire lingered after everyone left. She stood at the kitchen sink, drying the dishes I'd washed, and asked softly, "Do you ever miss him?" I paused. "Sometimes," I said, "but not in the way you'd think. I miss the version of him I created in my head, the man I thought I had, the one who looked at me like I was a new chapter instead of a safe place to hide while he wrote lies." She nodded, didn't say anything else. I appreciated that. There was a time I would have felt ashamed, like I should have known better, done better, been smarter. But that time had passed. I no longer saw myself as the woman who got tricked. I saw myself as the woman who got free, and I saw the difference in the mirror. There was light in my eyes again. The fine lines around my mouth had softened, not from creams or treatments, but from finally letting go of the weight I'd carried for years. People around town began to notice too. At the market, someone said, "You look younger, Evelyn." At the library, a former student hugged me and said, "You feel lighter." They were right. I was no longer shrinking to make others comfortable, no longer tolerating subtle disrespect in exchange for temporary affection. I had become, fully and unapologetically, myself. I started attending jazz nights at a small venue downtown. I didn't go to meet anyone. I went to hear the saxophone fill the air and remind me that life could still surprise me in beautiful ways. One night, a gentleman about my age asked if the seat beside me was taken. He wore a navy suit and had a kind, nervous smile. I smiled back. "No," I said. "But just no. I don't do second chances, only firsts." He chuckled. "Then let's start with a hello." I didn't give him my number, but I gave him my name. That was enough, because now I knew, truly knew, that I don't need to be rescued, adored, or completed. I just need to be seen. And if no one else sees me, that's fine, because I see myself now, clearly, proudly, and without apology. It was a Tuesday when I received the letter from the bank. It wasn't addressed to me. It was forwarded from my old joint account with Mark. Somehow they hadn't updated the contact records yet. Inside was a notice of default on a small business loan. Nancy's name was on the paperwork. So was Mark's. Apparently, after I shut down the Mateo Fund, they tried to start something official, some kind of boutique real estate firm. They'd used the same fraudulent structure they'd built around me, but this time, the money dried up. Fast. The bank had flagged inconsistencies. A quiet investigation was underway. I didn't say a word. I didn't call anyone. I just folded the letter, tucked it in my filing cabinet, and went back to sipping my tea. Let them face the truth the way I had to, without warning, without mercy. Let them answer questions under fluorescent lights and legal pressure. I didn't need to watch it happen. The universe had a better imagination than I ever could. That's the thing about silent women. People mistake our stillness for weakness. But they forget. We watch everything. We learn the terrain. And when we strike, it's not with noise, it's with certainty. I could have gone after them in court, sued, ruined them publicly. But I didn't need headlines. I didn't need their shame on display. I already had everything I wanted: my home, my name, my family, slowly rebuilding, and most importantly, my peace. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about subtraction. Taking your presence back, taking your love back, letting the hole you leave behind echo in them forever. Because the truth is, I was never just the woman they lied to. I was the storm they didn't see coming, and I walked away without a single scratch.